The council chamber of the Kryveth Ascendancy had never gone silent like this before. Ambassador Ren Osei stood alone at the center of the circular floor, surrounded by delegates from 41 species, watching as the emergency transmission finished playing on the great holographic display above them. On the screen, a single human soldier stood over the wreckage of an Ascendancy dreadnought, having disabled its entire crew without firing a single kill shot. Behind her, 11 more soldiers secured the vessel with the same eerie, deliberate restraint. Not because they lacked the ability to kill, but because they had chosen not to. "Explain this," demanded High Speaker Thessaly Vorn, her four-jointed hands trembling with something between fury and disbelief. "You sent us your soldiers to fight in the Kryveth War. We expected an army. Instead you sent 12 people who disabled a warship, crewed by 300 without killing a single one of them." Ren allowed himself the smallest, tired smile. "You asked us for warriors," he said. "We gave you the ones we're actually afraid of." 3 days earlier, none of this had seemed possible at all. The galaxy had been drowning in the Kryveth War for 6 years, a brutal conflict between the expansionist Ascendancy and the fractured coalition of free worlds, a war that had already claimed 11 planets and reduced entire star systems to debris fields. Earth had remained neutral for most of it, a young species still finding its footing among the stars, watching from the sidelines as older, more powerful civilizations tore each other apart. That changed the day the Ascendancy's warfleet reached the edge of human space, and the Coalition, desperate and outgunned, sent an official plea for aid. "We need soldiers," Coalition Chancellor Idrik Mott had said, standing in Earth's newly built diplomatic hall, his 3 eyes wide with barely restrained desperation. "Your species is young, but you have shown discipline no one expected. We need warriors who can turn the tide." Earth's Unified Council debated for 2 days. Most species who joined the war sent their most aggressive, most decorated combat units. Soldiers bred and trained purely for destruction. Earth's council chose differently, in a decision that would baffle the galaxy for months to come. They sent 12 people from the Sentinel Program, a division so quietly funded and rarely discussed, that even most of Earth's own military leadership barely acknowledged its existence. The Sentinels were not conventional soldiers. Each one had been selected not for aggression, but for something the Ascendancy's war doctrine had never accounted for: absolute restraint under absolute provocation. Former hostage negotiators. Former disaster zone medics who had pulled survivors from collapsed buildings under active gunfire. A former death row exoneration investigator who had spent a decade proving innocent people didn't deserve to die. People who had spent their entire lives learning exactly how much force was necessary, and refusing, under any pressure, to use more than that. Commander Yara Chen led them, a woman who had spent 15 years running Earth's international crisis response teams before the Sentinel Program was even conceived. She did not look like a warrior. She looked, to Ascendancy eyes, dangerously unimpressive. The first Ascendancy commander to encounter the Sentinels made that exact mistake. Fleet Marshal Draven Kess intercepted their transport 3 days into the mission, expecting an easy kill. 12 poorly armed humans in a single unescorted shuttle, ripe for capture and interrogation. He ordered his flagship to disable their engines and board. That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for him. The boarding party of 20 Ascendancy Marines breached the shuttle, expecting panic. Instead, they found the Sentinels waiting in perfect, unnerving calm, weapons holstered, hands visible, Commander Chen standing at the front with an expression that unsettled the Marines far more than any weapon could have. "You don't have to do this," Chen said, her voice level, almost gentle. "Stand down, and no one on either side needs to die today." The Marine commander laughed and gave the order to open fire. What followed was not the massacre he expected. The Sentinels moved with a precision built not around killing efficiently, but around neutralizing threats with the absolute minimum harm necessary, disarming, restraining, redirecting weapons fire into bulkheads rather than bodies, using the Marines' own momentum and armor weight against them in a boarding corridor, never designed for close combat. Within 4 minutes, All 20 Marines were subdued, disarmed, and alive, several of them stunned into confused silence by soldiers who had every opportunity to kill them and chose, again and again, not to. Draven Kess boarded the shuttle personally afterward, furious and humiliated. Expecting to finish what his Marines had failed to do, he found Commander Chen kneeling beside one of his wounded soldiers, applying a field dressing to a shoulder wound with the same calm efficiency she'd shown disabling his entire boarding party minutes earlier. "Why," Kess demanded, "would you show mercy to soldiers who came to kill you?" Chen did not look up from her work. "Because showing you exactly how much force we're capable of, and choosing not to use it, is a more effective deterrent than any body count could ever be." Nobody knew what the humans were hiding behind that restraint, and Kess intended to find out the hard way. He escalated. Over the following days, the Ascendancy threw increasingly aggressive forces at the Sentinel team as they moved deeper into contested territory, on a mission the Coalition had assigned them: extract 8,000 civilian refugees trapped in the besieged colony of Halveth Prime, before Ascendancy forces overran the planet entirely. Each encounter followed the same pattern, and each time, it unsettled Ascendancy command a little more. The Sentinels never escalated first, they never killed when disabling would suffice. And yet they were never overwhelmed, never broken, never forced to compromise the mission, no matter how many soldiers the Ascendancy threw at them. The truth stunned the entire war effort when Fleet Marshal Kess finally understood what he was actually facing. The Sentinels were not restrained because they were weak, they were restrained because restraint, applied with absolute discipline and total capability, was more devastating to enemy morale than brutality had ever been. Ascendancy soldiers who expected to die fighting an honorable death instead found themselves alive, disarmed, and humiliated by an enemy who had never once needed to kill them to win. Word spread through Ascendancy ranks faster than any battlefield victory could have traveled. Not fear of human weapons, but fear of an enemy that made killing look like a failure of skill rather than a demonstration of it. The Council had made a terrible mistake underestimating what that fear could do to an army's will to fight. By the time Commander Chen's team reached Halveth Prime, entire Ascendancy units were requesting reassignment rather than face the Sentinels again. Fleet Marshal Kess, desperate to salvage his reputation and his campaign, made a decision that would define the rest of the war. He took 8,000 refugees hostage himself, personally, threatening to execute them publicly unless the Sentinels stood down and surrendered. The Queen suddenly froze. Not literally, but High Speaker Vorn, watching the standoff unfold from Ascendancy Command, understood in that moment that Kess had just made an unforgivable strategic error. The Sentinels had spent their entire mission proving they would use restraint against soldiers. Hostages were an entirely different equation. Commander Chen requested a live channel to speak with Kess directly. "You've spent this entire campaign learning what we won't do," she said. "You're about to learn what we will." What followed was not a battle. It was the most carefully coordinated operation the Sentinel Program had ever executed, 6 years of training compressed into 11 brutal minutes. While 3 Sentinels created a diversion at the primary hostage checkpoint, the remaining 9 infiltrated through maintenance tunnels. Chen's team had mapped from refugee testimony gathered during their approach to the planet. Tunnels that even Ascendancy intelligence hadn't accounted for. They extracted all 8,000 hostages without a single civilian casualty, and without killing a single Ascendancy guard, using tranquilizer rounds, disabling strikes, and a level of coordinated precision that seemed, to the guards experiencing it, almost supernatural. Fleet Marshal Kess was captured personally by Commander Chen herself. In the command center he had believed was secure, disarmed before he even realized his perimeter had been breached. "You could have killed me," Kess said, staring up at her from the floor, stripped of every advantage he'd relied on. "Every soldier I sent against you, you could have killed. Why show restraint to an enemy who showed you none?" Chen knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "Because the moment we start killing when we don't have to, We become exactly the kind of threat this galaxy already fears from powerful species. We didn't come here to prove we could match your brutality. We came here to prove there was a better way to win. That single exchange, recorded and later broadcast across Coalition space, changed how the entire galaxy understood the war. The Ascendancy's military doctrine had been built for 6 years around the assumption that overwhelming force would eventually break any resistance. The Sentinels shattered that doctrine not through superior weapons, but through demonstrating, mission after mission, that discipline and restraint could defeat brutality without ever needing to become it. Within 2 months, 3 additional Ascendancy fleet commanders requested private negotiations with coalition diplomats, citing irregular battlefield conditions that made continued engagement unsustainable. What they meant, though none would say it publicly, was that their soldiers had stopped believing they could win a war against an enemy who refused to give them the moral high ground of victimhood, and refused to become monstrous enough to justify their own aggression. The Kryveth War ended 4 months after Halveth Prime, not through a decisive military victory, but through a negotiated ceasefire the Ascendancy itself requested, unable to sustain a war effort against an opponent that had made brutality look like weakness instead of strength. High Speaker Vorn, addressing the Council months later, finally understood the full weight of what Ambassador Osei had told her that day. "You asked us for warriors," she said slowly, studying the recording of Commander Chen's team one final time. "You sent us the ones you feared most, because you understood something about power that we had forgotten in 6 years of war. That the ability to destroy means nothing, next to the discipline to choose not to." Ren Osei nodded once, watching the same recording, thinking of Commander Chen and the 11 people who had spent this war refusing to become what they were fighting against. "That's the thing about humans, High Speaker," he said quietly. "We didn't send you our strongest warriors. We sent you the ones strong enough to win without losing themselves in the process. And in this galaxy, that kind of strength terrifies people far more than any weapon ever could." The peace that followed the Kryveth War was fragile at first, built on a ceasefire few believed would hold. But something unexpected happened in the months after Halveth Prime. Ascendancy veterans who had faced the Sentinels began speaking publicly about what they had witnessed. Not with the bitterness of defeated soldiers, but with something closer to reluctant respect. Soldiers who had been disarmed and left alive told stories of an enemy who could have ended them in an instant and chose, deliberately, again and again, to let them walk away. Fleet Marshal Kess, stripped of his command and awaiting judgment before the Ascendancy's war tribunal, requested one final meeting with Commander Chen before her team departed Ascendancy space. "I spent 6 years believing that strength meant the willingness to do whatever was necessary to win," he told her standing in a detention block. "Instead of the command deck he'd once ruled. You showed my entire fleet something different. I don't know if I can forgive you for that, but I think, given time, I might understand it." "You don't need to forgive us," Chen said. "You just need to remember it the next time someone convinces you that cruelty is the same thing as power." The Sentinel Program remained small after the war, deliberately so. Earth's unified council resisted every pressure to expand it into a larger conventional force, understanding instinctively what the Ascendancy had learned the hard way, that the Sentinels' strength depended entirely on remaining rare, remaining disciplined, remaining exactly what they were built to be, rather than becoming another army among the countless armies already scattered across the galaxy. Commander Chen retired 18 months later, her legacy already reshaping how the Coalition of Free Worlds trained its own soldiers, teaching a doctrine of restraint that spread slowly across a dozen allied species who had spent generations believing brutality and victory were the same thing. Years afterward, when new recruits asked why the Sentinel Program still trained hostage negotiators and disaster medics instead of hardened killers, the answer they received was always the same, passed down almost like scripture among those who understood exactly what had happened at Halveth Prime. Because the galaxy has never once been short on soldiers willing to kill. the instructors would say. What it has always been desperately short on is people strong enough to win without needing to.